The morning sun painted the Arizona desert in shades of gold and crimson as Samuel Morrison stood on his ranch porch, watching the dust cloud approach his property. At 28, Sam had built his cattle ranch from nothing, working the harsh desert land until it yielded enough to sustain his small herd. His weathered hands gripped the porch railing as he recognized the figures riding toward him. Apache warriors, their horses moving with the fluid grace of people born to the saddle. Sam's heart hammered against his ribs, but he forced himself to remain still. Running would mean death, and fighting would be suicide against a dozen mounted warriors. The Apache had been relatively peaceful in recent months, but tensions always simmered beneath the surface like water on hot stone. The lead warrior, a man with silver streaking his black braids and scars mapping his weathered face, raised his hand in a gesture of peace. Sam slowly raised his own hand in response, stepping down from his porch with careful, measured movements. "I am Chief Running Bear of the Chiricahua," the elder said in heavily accented English. His dark eyes studied Sam with an intensity that made the young rancher feel like prey being evaluated by a predator. "You are the one they call Morrison?" "Yes, sir," Sam replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "This is my land. How can I help you?" The chief's weathered face remained impassive as he gestured toward three young women who sat mounted behind the main group of warriors. Sam's breath caught as he saw them clearly for the first time. They were tall and proud, their long black hair braided with colorful beads that caught the morning light. Their buckskin dresses were decorated with intricate beadwork that spoke of high status within their tribe. The tallest of the three, a woman who appeared to be in her early 20s, sat her horse with regal bearing. Her dark eyes met Sam's with a directness that surprised him. Most Apache women he'd encountered kept their gaze lowered around white men. This one studied him as openly as he studied her. "These are my daughters," Chief Running Bear said, his voice carrying a weight that made Sam understand this was no casual introduction. "Ayana, Halona, and Senna. They are strong women, skilled in all the ways of our people. They can ride like the wind, track game across stone, and their arrows find their mark when men's fail." Sam nodded respectfully, though confusion clouded his thoughts. "They're clearly remarkable women, Chief, but I'm not sure why you're telling me this." The old chief dismounted with fluid grace despite his age, his moccasined feet silent on the packed earth of Sam's yard. The other warriors remained mounted, their eyes constantly scanning the surrounding terrain for threats. Sam noticed their weapons were present but not immediately ready, a sign they came in peace but were prepared for trouble. "You have been watched, Morrison," the chief continued, walking closer until he stood just outside what most men would consider a comfortable distance. "For 3 seasons my scouts have observed you. You treat the land with respect. You do not hunt our sacred places. When my hunters crossed your property following wounded deer, you did not shoot first and ask questions later like other white men." Sam remembered that incident clearly. He'd found 2 young Apache warriors tracking a wounded elk across his pasture. Instead of confronting them with his rifle, he'd approached them openly and offered water from his well. The elk had died near his barn, and he'd helped them dress the meat before sending them on their way with extra supplies. "Any man would have done the same," Sam said, though he knew that wasn't true. Most ranchers in the territory shot Apache on sight, considering them nothing more than raiders and thieves. "No," Chief Running Bear said firmly. "Most of your people see us as animals to be driven away or killed. You see us as people. This is rare among the white eyes." The chief gestured toward his daughters again, and Sam noticed the way the morning light seemed to favor them, making their skin glow like burnished copper and their beadwork sparkle like captured stars. "My daughters need husbands," the chief said bluntly, his words hitting Sam like a physical blow. "Not Apache men. We have lost too many to your soldiers and diseases. Our blood grows weak from too much mixing within our own families. We need new strength." Sam's mouth went dry as understanding dawned. "Chief Running Bear, I'm honored, but I don't think—" "You think you have a choice," the old warrior interrupted, though his tone remained conversational rather than threatening. "You think this is a request?" The mounted warriors shifted slightly, their hands moving closer to their weapons. Not threatening exactly, but making their presence known. "The spirits have spoken," Chief Running Bear continued. "In dreams and signs, they have shown us that you are the one chosen for my daughters. Your children will bridge our peoples. Your blood will strengthen our tribe, while our ways will teach your children to truly know this land." Sam's mind raced as he looked from the chief to his daughters and back again. The tallest daughter, Ayanna, spoke for the first time, her English clear and precise despite a musical accent that made each word sound like song. "We do not wish this any more than you do, white man," she said, her dark eyes flashing with something that might have been anger or amusement. "But our Father's word is law, and the spirits have spoken. We will make the best of what cannot be changed." The second daughter, Halona, remained silent, but Sam could see intelligence burning in her gaze as she studied him. The youngest, Senna, looked barely 18 and seemed more curious than upset about the situation. "I need time to think about this," Sam said carefully. "This isn't a decision a man makes lightly." Chief Running Bear nodded as if he'd expected this response. "You will have time. My daughters will stay here, in your barn, while you consider. They will work for their keep. They are not helpless women who need to be cared for like children. In 1 moon's time, you will give us your answer." "And if I refuse?" Sam asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The chief's smile was thin and dangerous. "You will not refuse. The spirits have chosen you, Morrison. To reject their will would bring great misfortune to you and all who dwell on this land." Sam felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. He looked at his small ranch, the modest house he'd built with his own hands, the barn that sheltered his few horses, the well he'd dug through solid rock to find water. It wasn't much, but it was his, earned through sweat and determination. Now these 3 Apache women would share his space, and somehow he suspected his simple life was about to become incredibly complicated. "Very well," he said finally. "They can stay in the barn. But I want it understood. They're free to leave whenever they choose. I won't keep anyone here against their will." Chief Running Bear's laugh was like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "My daughters are Apache women, Morrison. They do nothing against their will. If they stay, it is because they choose to stay." The chief mounted his horse with the same fluid grace he'd shown dismounting. The other warriors began to pull back, but the 3 daughters remained where they were. "We will return in 1 moon, Chief Running Bear called as he turned his horse toward the desert. "Have your answer ready." Sam watched the war party disappear into the heat shimmer rising from the desert floor, leaving him alone with 3 Apache women who were supposedly destined to become his wives. The silence stretched between them until Ayanna dismounted and began untying bundles from her horse's back. "Where do you want us to put our things?" she asked practically, as if being left with a strange white man was an everyday occurrence. "The barn has empty stalls in the back," Sam said, finding his voice. "There's fresh straw, and it's clean. You'll have privacy there." Halona and Senna dismounted as well, moving with the same natural grace as their older sister. Sam noticed they carried no weapons openly, but he suspected they were far from defenseless. "We will need water for washing and cooking," Halona said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was deeper than Ayanna's, with a slight rasp that suggested someone who wasn't afraid to speak her mind. "The well is there," Sam pointed to the stone-lined opening near his house. "Water's good and cold even in summer. Help yourselves to whatever you need." Senna, the youngest, stepped forward with a shy smile that transformed her serious face into something radiant. "You are not what we expected," she said softly. "What did you expect?" Sam asked, curious despite the surreal nature of his situation. "Someone older, meaner. Most white men who live alone in the desert are running from something or someone. They drink too much and smell bad and treat women like property." "I don't drink much," Sam said, earning a small smile from all three sisters. "And I've always believed women should be treated with respect." "We shall see," Ayanna said, shouldering her bundles and heading toward the barn. Actions speak louder than words in any language. Sam watched them settle into the barn's back stalls, transforming the plain space into something that looked more like home with colorful blankets and personal belongings. They worked together with the efficiency of people who'd shared space their entire lives, each knowing instinctively what the others needed. As the day wore on, Sam tried to go about his normal routine of checking cattle, mending fence, and maintaining his equipment. But he found himself constantly aware of the three women now sharing his property. They spoke quietly among themselves in their own language, their voices rising and falling like music. Around midday, the smell of cooking food drifted from the barn area. Sam's stomach reminded him that he'd been too nervous to eat breakfast. He approached cautiously, not wanting to intrude, but Senna waved him over with a friendly gesture. "We have made enough for 4, she said, ladling something that smelled incredible from a pot hung over a small fire they'd built in a safe area outside the barn. It would be wasteful to let good food go uneaten. Sam accepted the wooden bowl she offered, containing what appeared to be some kind of stew with meat, corn, and wild plants he didn't recognize. The first bite exploded with flavors he'd never experienced, complex, hearty, and deeply satisfying. "This is amazing," he said honestly. "What's in it?" "Rabbit we caught this morning," Ayanna said, settling cross-legged on a blanket near the fire. "Wild onions, corn, and herbs from the desert. My sister Senna is the best cook in our village." The youngest sister blushed prettily at the compliment, tucking a strand of black hair behind her ear. "Our grandmother taught us all to find food where others see only empty land." As they ate together in the shade of the barn, Sam found himself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. The three sisters were intelligent, funny, and surprisingly easy to talk to. Ayanna possessed a sharp wit and wasn't afraid to use it, often making observations about white customs that were both insightful and gently mocking. Halona proved to be intensely practical, asking detailed questions about his ranch operations and water management. Senna seemed to find wonder in everything, from the way his windmill turned to the different kinds of rocks in his yard. "Why aren't you married already?" Halona asked bluntly as they finished their meal. "You're not ugly, you have land, and you seem to have all your teeth. Most white men your age have wives." Sam almost choked on his last bite of stew. "I've been too busy building this place, and I haven't met anyone who—" He trailed off, realizing how that might sound. "Anyone who what?" Ayanna pressed, her dark eyes dancing with mischief. "Anyone who could live out here. It's isolated, hard work, sometimes dangerous. Most women prefer town life." "Apache women are not most women," Senna said quietly. "We are raised to be partners, not decorations. We work beside our men, not behind them." The afternoon passed more quickly than Sam had expected. The sisters helped him repair a section of fence that had been damaged in the last windstorm, their hands quick and sure as they worked with the wire and wood. Ayanna proved surprisingly strong, able to handle fence posts that would challenge many men. Halona had an engineer's eye for making repairs that would last, while Senna seemed to anticipate what tools would be needed before they were asked for. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Sam found himself wondering what his life would be like with these three remarkable women as his wives. The thought should have terrified him, but instead, he felt a strange sense of rightness, as if pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known he was solving were suddenly falling into place. That evening, as he lay in his bed listening to the soft sounds of the sisters settling in for the night in the barn, Sam stared at the ceiling and tried to process everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, he'd been a simple rancher with a quiet life and modest dreams. Now he was apparently destined to marry 3 Apache princesses and father children who would bridge 2 worlds. The rational part of his mind insisted this was madness. The spiritual part, influenced by years of living close to the land and its mysteries, whispered that perhaps the spirits did know something he didn't. And the practical part noted that the sisters had already proven more helpful in one day than most hired hands he'd known. As sleep finally began to claim him, Sam's last conscious thought was that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, and perhaps new understanding of what the future held for all of them. The second week of living with the 3 Apache sisters brought unexpected revelations that changed Sam's understanding of everything he thought he knew about women, work, and survival in the desert. The morning started like others had begun to, with the sound of the sisters moving quietly about their morning routines before dawn. Their voices a soft murmur of conversation in their native language. Sam emerged from his house to find Ayanna already mounted on her horse, dressed in practical riding clothes that looked like a mixture of Apache and white frontier styles. Her long black hair was braided back for work, and she carried a coiled rope at her saddle. 3 of your cattle are missing, she announced without preamble. Tracks lead toward the broken country to the north. They've been gone since yesterday afternoon, maybe longer. Sam felt his stomach drop. Losing cattle meant losing money he couldn't afford to lose, and the broken country she mentioned was a maze of arroyos and stone formations where cattle could disappear forever or fall victim to predators. I'll saddle up and go look for them, he said, mentally calculating how many days of searching it might take to find 3 head in that terrain. We'll all go, Helona said, emerging from the barn, leading her own horse. 6 eyes see more than 2, and we know that country well. Our people have hunted there for generations. Sam started to protest that it was his responsibility, but Senna appeared with his horse already saddled and ready. The gesture was thoughtful and efficient, and he realized arguing would waste precious daylight. Lead the way, he said instead, mounting up and following as Ayanna set off toward the broken country at a pace that covered ground quickly without exhausting the horses. The landscape changed as they rode north, the relatively flat ranch land giving way to a confusion of red stone formations, deep washes, and hidden valleys that could conceal anything from lost cattle to Apache war parties. Sam had always avoided this area, knowing his inexperience could get him lost or worse. But the 3 sisters moved through the maze of stone and sage as if following a well-marked road. Ayanna read sign in the soft earth and stone surfaces that Sam couldn't even see, while Helona seemed to possess an internal map that told her exactly where they were at all times. Senna rode slightly apart from the group, her eyes constantly scanning the terrain for movement or anything out of place. There, Senna called softly, pointing toward a narrow canyon that cut deep into the red stone. I see something moving. They approached carefully, and Sam felt his heart sink as he spotted his 3 missing cattle standing at the bottom of the canyon. Trapped by walls too steep to climb and a rockfall that blocked the only easy way out. Worse, one of the animals was limping badly, probably injured in whatever mishap had driven them into this natural trap. How do we get them out? Sam asked, studying the situation. The cattle were 40 feet below them at the bottom of the canyon, with no obvious way to reach them except a treacherous climb down rock faces that would challenge an experienced mountaineer. We don't go down, Ayanna said, dismounting and examining the canyon rim. We bring them up. What followed was a display of practical engineering and teamwork that left Sam amazed. The sisters worked together with the efficiency of a military unit, each knowing her role without discussion. They used their ropes to create a pulley system anchored to the sturdiest rock formations, then lowered one end into the canyon. "Someone has to go down and get ropes on them," Helona said, already stripping off her outer clothing to reveal the practical undergarments that would allow for easier climbing. "I'll go," Sam said immediately. "They're my cattle." "You'll fall and break your neck," Ayanna said bluntly. "Apache children climb rocks like this before they can walk properly. You'll only make more work for us." Before Sam could argue, Helona had tied a rope around her waist and begun descending the canyon wall with the fluid movements of someone born to vertical terrain. She seemed to flow down the rock face, finding handholds and footholds that Sam couldn't even see from his position above. The injured cow proved to be the biggest challenge. Its leg wasn't broken, but it had a deep gash that made it reluctant to move. Helona spent nearly an hour gaining the animal's trust, speaking to it in a mixture of Apache and English while she cleaned and bandaged the wound with supplies from her medicine pouch. Getting the cattle up and out required all four of them working together. Sam found himself following orders from Ayanna, who had clearly taken charge of the operation. Her commands were clear, practical, and delivered with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in dangerous situations. By the time they had all three cattle safely out of the canyon and heading back toward the ranch, the sun was well past its peak. Sam's shirt was soaked with sweat despite the autumn weather, and his hands were raw from handling ropes. But his cattle were safe, and he'd learned something valuable about the three women who were supposedly destined to be his wives. "That would have taken me days to figure out," he admitted as they drove the cattle home. "If I could have figured it out at all." "Different skills for different places," Senna said diplomatically. "You know things about raising cattle that we don't. We know things about this land that you don't. Together, we know more than any of us alone." That evening, as they tended to the injured cow and settled the others safely in the pasture closest to the house, Sam found himself looking at the three sisters with new eyes. They weren't just beautiful women who had been forced on him by circumstances beyond their control. They were skilled, intelligent partners who could hold their own in any situation this harsh land might present. The realization brought new questions and new concerns. If he accepted his supposed destiny and married these three women, what kind of life would they build together? How would the outside world react to such an unusual arrangement? And perhaps most importantly, could he ever be the kind of man who deserved such remarkable partners? These thoughts occupied his mind as he sat on his porch after dinner, watching the sisters work together to prepare items they would need for the coming winter. They moved around the fire they'd built near the barn with practiced efficiency, mending clothes, preparing medicines from wild plants they'd gathered, and working on what appeared to be new winter garments cut from hides they'd brought with them. Ayanna looked up from the beadwork she was adding to a pair of moccasins and caught him watching. "You're thinking too much, white man. Thinking won't change what the spirits have decided." "Maybe not," Sam replied, "but I need to understand what I'm accepting if I agree to this. It's not just about me anymore." Helona set aside the leather she was working and fixed him with her direct gaze. "What do you want to understand? Ask us directly instead of watching and wondering." Sam appreciated her straightforward approach. "What happens if this doesn't work? If we try living together as families and it's a disaster? What happens to all of you?" The three sisters exchanged glances that spoke of conversations they'd had without him. Senna answered first, her voice quiet but firm. "Apache women are not property to be returned if found unsatisfactory. If this arrangement fails, we make our own choices about what comes next. We could return to our tribe, but we would be marked as women who failed to bridge our peoples. We could try to find other white men willing to marry Apache wives, but most would only want us as curiosities or servants. Or we could try to make our way alone in your world, which offers few opportunities for women without family connections. In other words, Ayanna added with characteristic bluntness, failure would be bad for all of us, but worse for us than for you. You could find another white wife easily enough. We would have limited choices and none of them good. The weight of responsibility settled on Sam's shoulders like a physical burden. These three women weren't just taking a chance on an unknown future. They were risking everything they'd ever known for the possibility of something better. That doesn't seem fair, he said. Life rarely is, Helona replied pragmatically. But we didn't accept this arrangement as helpless victims. We chose to see opportunity where others might see only obligation. The question is whether you can do the same. Sam spent that night lying awake again, but this time his thoughts were more focused. The practical questions were becoming clearer, even if the answers weren't yet obvious. Could he provide for 4 people instead of 1? Could he build a house large enough for multiple families? Could he protect them from the hostility they would certainly face from other white settlers? More importantly, could he open his heart to love 3 women simultaneously? Was that even possible? Or was he being asked to create some kind of business partnership disguised as marriage? The next morning brought an unexpected test of their growing partnership. Sam woke to the sound of multiple horses approaching fast, and his blood chilled as he recognized the voices calling his name. Tom Bradley and his sons were riding hard toward the ranch, and Tom Bradley was the kind of man who brought trouble wherever he went. Sam dressed quickly and stepped onto his porch as the Bradley party reined up in his yard. Tom was a big man who'd gone to fat in middle age, his face permanently red from too much drinking and too much anger. His 3 sons took after him in temperament if not appearance, and all 4 men wore guns like they knew how to use them. "Morning, Sam," Tom called, though his tone held no friendliness. "Heard you got some visitors staying with you." "News travels fast," Sam replied carefully, noting the way Tom's eyes searched the area around the barn. "What brings you out this way so early?" "Concerned neighbors," Tom's oldest son, Jake, said with a nasty grin. "Can't have Apaches camping out this close to decent folks. Makes people nervous." Sam felt anger flare in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "Last I checked, this was still my land. I'll decide who's welcome here." "Not when it's a danger to others," Tom Bradley said, his hand resting casually on his gun butt. "Those savages could be signaling war parties, planning raids. We can't take that chance." "They're not signaling anyone," Sam said firmly. "They're working on my ranch, earning their keep like any hired hands." "Apache don't do honest work," the youngest Bradley boy sneered. "They steal and kill. That's all they know." The conversation was spiraling toward violence when Ayanna stepped out of the barn, followed by her sisters. All 3 women were armed now, Sam realized. Not obviously, but he could see the handles of knives at their belts and suspected they had other weapons concealed. The Bradley men's hands moved toward their guns but stopped when they got a good look at the 3 sisters. The Apache women were tall, proud, and beautiful, but more importantly, they moved with the confident grace of people who knew exactly how dangerous they were. "You must be the concerned neighbors," Ayanna said, her English perfectly clear and her tone politely mocking. "How kind of you to ride all this way to check on us." Tom Bradley's face darkened further. "Don't get smart with me, girl. I've killed Apaches before." "And I've killed white men," Ayanna replied conversationally, her hand moving to rest on her knife handle. "Shall we compare techniques?" The tension in the yard ratcheted up several levels as the Bradley men realized they might have bitten off more than they could chew. Sam stepped forward, trying to defuse the situation before it exploded into gunfire. "Tom, these women are under my protection. They haven't caused any trouble and they won't cause any trouble as long as they're left alone." "Your protection?" Jake Bradley laughed harshly. You think you can protect 3 Apache squaws against the whole territory? People are already talking, Sam, saying you've gone native, that you're no better than the savages yourself. Then people are saying things that aren't their business, Sam replied, his own anger finally showing in his voice. And if anyone has a problem with how I run my ranch, they can take it up with me directly. Tom Bradley spat in the dust, his eyes moving from Sam to the 3 sisters and back again. This ain't over, Morrison. You can't hide behind them forever, and they can't hide behind you. Sooner or later, this arrangement of yours is going to bring trouble down on all our heads. The Bradley party wheeled their horses and thundered away, leaving a cloud of dust and the echo of threats hanging in the air. Sam watched them go with a sinking heart, knowing Tom Bradley was right about one thing. This situation was going to bring trouble, and probably sooner rather than later. "We should leave," Senna said quietly, her face pale with worry. "We don't want to bring danger to you." "You're not bringing danger," Sam said firmly. "You're just giving cowards an excuse to show their true colors. I won't be driven off my own land by men like Tom Bradley." Ayanna studied his face with her penetrating gaze. "You're sure about this? Once we make a stand here, there's no backing down. They'll keep coming, and next time, they might not come to talk." Sam looked at the 3 sisters, Ayanna with her fierce pride, Halona with her practical strength, Senna with her gentle wisdom. In just 2 weeks, they'd become more than temporary guests. They'd become part of his life in ways he was only beginning to understand. "I'm sure," he said, surprised by the conviction in his own voice. "This is our home now, all of ours, and we'll defend it together." The look that passed between the 3 sisters was one of surprise, respect, and something that might have been the beginning of affection. For the first time since their father had brought them to his ranch, Sam felt like they were truly seeing him as a partner rather than an obligation. But as he watched the dust cloud from the Bradley horses disappear toward town, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real test of their alliance was yet to come. The final week before Chief Running Bear's return arrived with the bite of early winter in the air and the knowledge that Sam's decision could no longer be delayed. The confrontation with Tom Bradley had spread throughout the territory like wildfire, and the isolation that had once protected Sam's ranch now felt more like a trap. But something fundamental had changed in the relationship between Sam and the 3 Apache sisters, something that made the approaching deadline feel less like doom and more like destiny finally revealing its true face. The change began 3 days after the Bradley visit, when a late-season thunderstorm rolled across the desert with the fury of the old gods. The wind hit first, howling across the flatlands and driving tumbleweeds against the barn with enough force to shake the entire structure. Then came the rain, not the gentle moisture the desert desperately needed, but a torrential downpour that turned every draw and wash into a raging river. Sam woke to the sound of his horses screaming in terror and the crash of something large striking his house. He grabbed his clothes and boots, running outside into the storm to find chaos reigning over his small ranch. A massive cottonwood, one of the few large trees on his property, had been uprooted by the wind and now lay across the corner of his house, its branches blocking the front door and water pouring through the damaged roof. But it was the scene at the horse corral that made his blood run cold. The storm had spooked his animals into a panicked frenzy, and they were threatening to break through the fence and scatter across the desert where they'd likely die in the arroyos or fall victim to predators. Worse, his prize stallion, a magnificent bay he'd spent 2 years training, had gotten tangled in broken fence wire and was thrashing desperately to free himself, while the sharp metal cut deeper into his legs with every movement. Sam ran toward the corral, knowing he was probably too late to save the stallion and possibly too late to save any of his horses. But as he reached the fence, he realized he wasn't alone. The 3 sisters were already there, moving through the storm and panicked animals with supernatural calm and skill. Ayanna had somehow gotten close enough to the stallion to begin cutting him free from the wire, her knife working with surgical precision while she spoke to the terrified animal in a voice that cut through the storm like music. Halona was at the gate, using her own body and voice to calm the other horses and prevent them from bolting through the damaged fence. Senna moved among the animals like a ghost, her hands gentle but firm as she checked each one for injuries and guided them away from the worst of the destruction. Working together in the howling wind and driving rain, they managed to save all the horses and get them secured in the barn before the worst of the storm passed. The stallion's legs were badly cut, but Ayanna's quick work had prevented permanent damage. By dawn, when the storm finally moved on toward the east, they were all exhausted, soaked to the skin, and covered in mud, but Sam's livestock were safe. As they stood in his damaged kitchen, drinking hot coffee and surveying the wreckage of the storm, Sam felt something shift inside his chest. These three women hadn't hesitated for a moment before risking their own safety to save his property. They'd worked with him as true partners, each contributing skills and courage that had made the difference between disaster and survival. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion and emotion. "You don't thank family," Senna said simply, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "You just do what needs doing. Family." The word hung in the air between them like a bridge spanning two worlds. Sam looked at each of the sisters, Ayanna with her fierce determination, Halona with her practical wisdom, Senna with her gentle strength, and realized that somewhere in the past 3 weeks, they had indeed become family in ways that had nothing to do with marriage contracts or tribal agreements. The next 2 days were spent cleaning up storm damage and making repairs, work that bound them together even more tightly than the emergency itself. Sam found himself naturally deferring to Ayanna's leadership in situations requiring quick decisions, relying on Halona's engineering skills for complex repairs, and turning to Senna for the kind of patient, careful work that required steady hands and attention to detail. More importantly, he began to understand the dynamic between the three sisters themselves. Ayanna was clearly the leader, the one who made final decisions when consensus couldn't be reached. But her leadership wasn't the harsh dominance he'd seen in many men. It was the kind of natural authority that came from being trusted to make good choices for the group. Halona served as the practical voice, the one who turned Ayanna's decisions into workable plans. Senna provided balance, the emotional wisdom that kept the group functioning as a family rather than just a working partnership. Together, they created something Sam had never experienced before, a sense of belonging that went deeper than mere cooperation or even friendship. For the first time in his adult life, he felt like part of something larger and stronger than himself. The revelation came to him as he watched the three sisters working together to prepare the evening meal on the second day after the storm. They moved around each other with the unconscious coordination of people who'd shared every important moment of their lives, anticipating each other's needs and providing support without being asked. Their conversation flowed seamlessly between English and Apache, including him when his input was needed but never making him feel excluded when they discussed things that were purely between sisters. This was what marriage could be, Sam realized. Not the grim duty he'd always imagined, where a man and woman tolerated each other for the sake of children and economic necessity. This was partnership in its deepest sense, people who chose to link their fates because together they were stronger, smarter, and more complete than any of them could be alone. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it filled him with a sense of rightness that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than logic or social convention. That evening, as they sat around the fire outside the barn, Sam made his decision. "I want to ask you something," he said, setting down his coffee cup and looking at each of the sisters in turn. "Not because your father ordered it, not because the spirit supposedly decreed it, but because I want to know what you think. If you could choose freely, without any pressure from your tribe or mine, what would you want? The three sisters exchanged glances that spoke of conversations they'd had in private. Ayanna answered first, her voice thoughtful and measured. I want a life that matters. I want to be part of building something that will last beyond my own lifetime. I want children who understand both worlds and can help our peoples find ways to live in peace. And I want a partner who sees me as an equal, not as property or a prize to be won. Halona nodded agreement. I want security for my family and the freedom to use my skills. I want to help build something new, something that takes the best of both Apache and white ways of living, and I want a husband who values my mind as much as my ability to bear children. Senna's answer came softly, but with conviction. I want a home where love grows naturally, not from obligation. I want children who never have to choose between being Apache and being American because they'll be both. And I want a husband who understands that strength comes in many forms, not just the kind that shows on the outside. Sam felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he absorbed their words. These weren't women resigned to their fate. They were women who had found a way to see opportunity in circumstances they couldn't control. And what do you want from us? Ayanna asked, turning the question back to him. What kind of life are you hoping to build if you accept this arrangement? Sam took a deep breath, knowing his next words would change everything for all of them. I want partners. I want women who will help me build something better than what either of our peoples has managed alone. I want children who will inherit the best of both worlds. And I want wives who choose to be here because they want to be, not because they have to be. The silence that followed was heavy with possibility and promise. Finally, Halona spoke. So we're all in agreement. The question is whether we have the courage to try. Courage we have, Ayanna said with a slight smile. The question is whether we're wise enough to make it work. The next morning brought Chief Running Bear and his warriors back to the ranch, arriving with the same silent efficiency that had marked their first visit. But this time, Sam didn't feel the same cold fear that had gripped him a month earlier. This time, he walked out to meet them with the three sisters beside him, and he felt the strength that came from facing the future as a unified family. The old chief dismounted and studied the group before him with eyes that missed nothing. Sam could see him taking note of the way the sisters stood close to Sam without seeming subservient, the way they looked at him with respect rather than resignation, and the way Sam himself had changed from uncertain boy to confident man. You have made your decision, Chief Running Bear observed. It wasn't a question. We all have, Sam replied, emphasizing the plural. Your daughters have agreed to marry me, and I've agreed to marry them. But we want it understood that this is our choice, made freely by all of us. The chief's weathered face creased in what might have been approval. The spirits choose wisely, but mortals must still have the wisdom to accept their gifts. You have learned this. We've learned a lot of things, Ayanna said, stepping forward to address her father directly. We've learned that this man sees us as partners, not property. We've learned that together we can build something stronger than any of us could create alone. And we've learned that love can grow from respect and shared purpose just as surely as from passion. Chief Running Bear nodded slowly, his gaze moving from his daughters to Sam and back again. And what of the white men who will object? What of those like the Bradley family who see any Apache as a threat to their way of life? We'll deal with problems as they come, Sam said firmly. Together. This is our land, our home, and our choice. Anyone who wants to challenge that will have to face all of us. The old chief's smile was fierce and proud. Spoken like a true son of the Apache. Very well. We will perform the ceremonies that will bind you to our family and bind our family to you. But know this, Morrison. Once you become Apache, there is no going back. Your children will be our children, your battles will be our battles, and your honor will be our honor." "I understand," Sam said, "and I accept." What followed was unlike any wedding ceremony Sam had ever witnessed. The Apache rituals were complex and symbolic, involving prayers to the four directions, the sharing of sacred foods, and exchanges of gifts that represented the blending of two families into one. The three sisters were beautiful in their ceremonial dress, their hair adorned with flowers and beadwork that caught the desert sunlight like captured stars. But more than the beauty or the ceremony itself, Sam was struck by the sense of rightness that filled him as he spoke the words that would bind his life to theirs. This wasn't the desperate gamble he'd once thought it was. It was the completion of something that had begun the moment he'd chosen kindness over fear when dealing with Apache hunters on his land. As the sun set on their wedding day, painting the desert sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sam stood with his three wives and looked toward the future they would build together. There would be challenges ahead, children to raise, neighbors to win over, and two very different cultures to bridge. But they would face those challenges as they had faced the storm, together, with courage, wisdom, and the